Welcome to the StarPodLog comic scene with your hosts, Jeff and Tony.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wiley.
I'm Tony Barletta.
Welcome back to the comic scene on StarPodLog. You know, if Tony, you want to set this up for us, set up what we're going to talk about.
I've seen it. I'm sure some fans have seen it. There's been some rumors about DC going around the internet, and especially Bleeding Cool picked them up, which, Bleeding Cool actually has sources, and some of their stories do come true. He has said that this rumor's been out there for a few years now, but because of the people he's heard it from recently, he thinks it has more likelihood of being true than it did back then, which is DC might be trying to move away from printing single-issue comics altogether in the near future. So that would shake things up tremendously, and the direct market certainly would never be the same.
Some of those rumors started after Corona started to unfold, and the industry itself started to change shape and change the way that they did things. And I didn't put a lot of stock into those rumors initially, but they just won't go away. The rumors just won't go away, and I feel like the more time goes on, the more credence is lent to them.
And you do see that DC certainly is not adverse to making major changes recently. Firing longtime publisher Dan DiDio, firing lots of other, the editor-in-chief, along with other editorial positions. There was a big shakeup with who they fired, about getting out of changing their distributor in the direct market to a different company. So moves that might seem, far-fetched a year or two ago certainly don't seem as far-fetched now, seeing how far they're going to make change.
And when I talk to the people that work at my local comic shop, and when I read comments from other people, that work for local comic shops on social media, DC is kind of persona non grata right now in comic book circles. The way that they have handled business, or some would argue mishandled business, it hasn't boded well, particularly in the comic reader's favor.
Yeah, I think a lot of stores got pretty fed up with DC and how they changed distributors on them and other things that went along with that. So they'd be happier having readers going to Marvel, going to Image, going to Indie Comics, and just maybe getting rid of DC. But can stores survive without DC sales at all? That's one question. I do understand from a publisher standpoint. I guess it is a case where single issue comics are so expensive now, with $4, $5, $6, or $7 each, that it's a big investment buying the single issues. But even that said, you can still go to your comic shop every week and see that they've sold out of certain titles, some DC.
Sure.
So people are still buying them even though the price is going up. But there still has to be a breaking point. So, if you're DC, do you look at that and say, does it make more sense to just move it to the way books are published, where, you just bring out the whole graphic novel at one time instead of serializing it? And then you just go to your bookstore and find out what new graphic novels came out that month. But that certainly hurts the direct market.
I have thought for a while, even before the pandemic, I've thought for a while that that you're going to see publishers start to move to that business model, even if it's a slow transition. Like, let's say they release a new title, and we'll just, for the sake of discussion, we'll just call it Deadpool Unleashed, and you would see a Deadpool Unleashed graphic novel Volume 1 hit comic shops in May, and then another edition 6 months later that picks up the same storyline, just to see how that business model works. But I kind of think this is where the industry is headed. Like you said, when you see books that are $3, $4, not even $3. I mean, the $3 comic book is kind of rare now. You're talking
it's gone.
$4 and up.
And that was just a couple years ago. DC was $3 like across the board almost.
Yeah, Hold the Line at $2.99. Well, that didn't last long.
Yeah, but it lasted a while, but they brought it back after Rebirth for a while. But yeah, they got rid of it again. Yeah.
Because it was just not sustainable.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's not sustainable. But I just, $5 for 10 minutes of entertainment is just not realistic in today's world.
I never understand a book that sells out. I mean, I guess I was always trying to get a first print of something, because that's kind of what mindset was back in the day, but I can never understand how second, third, fourth printings sell as well as they do. To me, it's like, well, if I've lost out on getting a first print, I'll just wait for the collected edition, and then I'll read it at one time and save some money.
I hear what you're saying, and I pretty much agree with you, but I do find it interesting that so many second, third, fourth, even fifth prints are so highly sought after because of whatever reason, whether it's a key issue or it's a low print run. I don't particularly buy into that mentality, but it is certainly a real thing for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that I think going to graphic novel only kind of makes more sense for fans if they are on a budget, or if they're not wanting to spend tons of money to pick up the individuals every week. And it makes more sense for the publisher. I'm wondering how a direct market could adapt if, all they have to rely on is, here we got some new graphic novels this week. Because it would really cut into that weekly business they're so accustomed to.
It also makes more sense in the fact that we live in a instant gratification society, and people aren't going to want to wait 5-6 months to watch an entire story arc play out.
Yeah.
We live in an on-demand society. You press a button and you're watching a movie on Netflix.
Right.
Whereas you don't have to go to a Blockbuster anymore, or even a Redbox if you don't want to.
True. I mean, with a graphic novel, you get 5 or 6 episodes in one setting.
Exactly. And for several years now, writers have tailored story arcs for the graphic novel. They're writing for a 5 or 6 issue story arc that they can turn around and flip into a graphic novel in a few months.
Yeah. And I mean, there's still going to be a need for a direct market, because there's no way that like a Barnes and Noble could ever find shelf space for all the indie books, all the Marvel, DC, even if they were all published as graphic novels. Because, like the new Batman, Catwoman, obviously that would be carried at Barnes and Noble at some point when it's collected. But the latest Image book, I mean, that's not going to, it might, but unless it's really hot and popular, it probably wouldn't. The latest Boom comic wouldn't, So there's going to be a need for a direct market, but how would it adjust to that kind of a structure? I don't know.
Nor do I. And to kind of follow up on your point too, when you go to a Barnes and Noble or any big ticket bookseller, most of the employees there aren't going to be, and I'm painting with a broad brush here, but most of them aren't going to be comic savvy. Like when I go to my LCS, I can ask valid questions. Hey, is this book any good? Was this story arc any good?
Sure.
And they're extremely well read, and I think that's the same for your LCS. Most LCSs are like that. But I don't expect that sort of comic knowledge from a big ticket book reseller.
Because all comic shops basically are run and worked by fans who are fans of the material themselves, so they're really knowledgeable of it.
Absolutely. And I just, it's hard to fathom that market would go up in smoke, but we're seeing some of it.
I think you'd see people spending less, though. I mean, right now there's still people like myself who've been collecting for a long time, wanting to keep a run in place. So you just keep buying the same title month in, month out, month in, month out. If you went to trades only, I think it becomes a case of, oh, do you want to buy this book? Do you want to buy this one? Do you want to buy this one? It doesn't, because you're not really having to keep something intact. You don't have to keep that run intact. So you might end up spending less. Just pick up a few trades.
I mean, my drug of choice are trade books, trade paperbacks.
Mm-hmm.
The only single issue title that I had on my pull list at my LCS just completed its run, Batgirl with issue number 50.
Okay.
But that's the only one that I have or had in single issue on my pull.
I might want to track that one down. Isn't that the first? Isn't that also the first appearance of the new Batwoman?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And that's honestly the only reason I got my hands on one is because it was on my pull.
Wow.
Yeah. I read just recently that that issue was sold out at the distributor level.
Wow.
So odds are between fans and speculators, that book is going to be extremely hard to find in your LCS.
Yeah. And that's another thing. I mean, comic shops are so great at helping their fans and respecting the fact that they have steady customers. That they'll do whatever they can to try to get books for them, and try to. You don't really see someone going the extra effort like at a Barnes and Noble as you would your local comic store, because they really appreciate your business. And they'll go the extra mile to find the extra book or to order it if they can.
Oh, of course. Most LCSs also have the advantage of being able to cultivate a community within their shop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're not going to get that at a Barnes and Noble, not for our comic book community.
Sure. I mean, if the rumor is true, I wonder if DC goes down that route, would other companies follow? Maybe.
Good question. Good question. I mean, one segment of this rumor that we're hearing is that they're going to discontinue printing comics, that DC would discontinue printing comics and only utilize the IPs for movies and TV shows and video games and whatnot.
Well, I think they would intend to still put out digital comics, which I have no interest in them, but I don't think you'd find a whole big reader base wanting digital comics. You just find the same ones that are already into digital. But I think they would just do digital, which is cheaper for them, and then just publishing them as trades.
I feel like I agree with what you're saying, but I feel like DC, Warner Brothers, AT&T, whoever is going to try and force feed digital comics into the market. This is how it is, this is how it is in the 21st century, and that's it. And if that happens, you're going to see certainly at least a phase where the collector's market is going to change dramatically. I'm not entirely sure how it would change, but like your comic conventions, regardless of size, I don't know how that's going to look anymore.
Well, you could still have a artist or writer, selling their own trade or issue, but they'd have to put it out themselves. They'd have to totally pay for the cost of publishing the entire thing. But they could do that just for the intention of selling it at cons. Would it be cost effective? I don't know. Another interesting thing too, and it would probably cut in on on the direct market as well would be, you know, if everything just goes to trade, you might see creators trying to kickstart more. And if it goes to Kickstarter, then the direct market sees none of that profit.
I think you're already starting to see some of that. Like I know Ethan Van Sciver had, for example, what was the name of his? He had a crowdfunding book. Cyberfrog. He had that. There's been several others. And I also wonder if you would start to see an exodus of some of the big name creators at Marvel and DC going to places like Image where they can create and continue to own their creations.
Well, Jimmy Palmiotti and his writing partner Justin Gray had that really long, brilliant run on Jonah Hex, and then he moved over and had that long run with his wife on Harley Quinn that was incredibly popular. But the two of them, Palmiotti and Gray, kickstarted many projects that were very successful for them. And you don't really see Palmiotti doing much for the big two these days, you know? Maybe he doesn't need to.
No, that's true. I saw where Donnie Cates did, was it Donnie Cates that did Crossover? Wasn't that for Image?
Yes, it just came out, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And I've read mixed reviews on it. I haven't read the book yet, but I've read, some people loved it and other people were like, eh.
Yeah.
But
I have it. I haven't read it yet.
Okay. So I could see from a creator standpoint where something like that would be significantly more appealing. You know, like, sure, yeah, I'd love, you know, from a creator standpoint, they might say, I'd love to have the chance to come in and write Fantastic Four for a little while or write Batman for a little while. But, you know, most creators probably have their own ideas of characters or worlds that they want to flesh out in a way that Marvel or DC simply doesn't allow them to do.
Sure. And you see Image and indie comics becoming more popular than ever.
Absolutely.
I wonder, looking at DC's interest in possibly getting rid of floppies. I mean, look at a project like a popular one right now, Dark Knights, the Dark Metal Dark Knights project. Every issue is like $6. It's like, or I think the regular copy is like $5. Then you got cardstock copies with popular artists, so you up the price to $6. But I don't, you know, you're not selling those individual issues for less than $5 or $6.
Right.
And when you look at it like that, does the company make more money selling that story as a trade? I don't think so, because you're maximizing $5 and $6 a pop, and you know, and people might still buy the trade when it's over.
You're right. Not to mention the variant covers, where I'm sure they get a larger cut. The LCS gets a larger cut.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, as a comic store, you got to be pretty happy when you see one of those nice $6 issues come with a nice cover, because you know it's going to sell well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you and I have discussed on this podcast before that we've each purchased comics just for the cover.
Yeah, yeah. I actually, at last trip to the comic store, I told them the same thing. I just got 2 of these just for the cover. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've got books in my my collection just for the cover. I have right now in my living room, I have one issue of Justice League of America. I think it's issue number 52. It's a Bagley cover of Dark Supergirl, and I've got like 4 copies of that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and just because I love the cover.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, it's framed in my living room.
Nice. Very nice. For me, it was the recent Alex Ross covers that he did for Marvel. I started getting a few of them, and they were just gorgeous. They had no logos. It was just the classic character look from a few decades back, and he kept doing. You know, I got like a Spider-Man. I got what else did I get? I got Spider-Man. I got Thor. And I just kept getting a few of these covers, and I kept getting more and more. And then it was like, okay, so I don't really buy these books, but he did so many awesome X-Men ones. I got Phoenix, and it just became like, what other Alex Ross covers are coming out. So that really suckered me into picking some up just for the cover, for sure.
Yeah. So I guess I don't think we'll have an answer this year, but I think by spring, early summer, we're going to see some serious shifts in how DC handles business.
Yeah. I mean, if there's any truth to these rumors, I don't think they'd hesitate to make the change just based on their actions this year. But it's just going to be interesting to see how the industry reacts and how it would adapt.
What is it about comics that you are thankful for?
Comics have become a major part of my life, and I never anticipated that. They just became a major part of my life, and I never anticipated owning as many as I do. I probably have more comics than most comic book stores at this point, but for me,
I've been to your house. I can verify that. That's probably true.
I have more than last time you were here too. But I mean, I remember like when I started getting into comics in the '80s, and I remember like falling asleep looking at comic boxes, just thinking, just imagine how many worlds and ideas are in those boxes. And that was just staggering to me. I mean, the idea that intelligent and thought-provoking authors could come up with so many ways to inspire us, so many ways to make us think about the world we live in. And then to couple that and put it together with art that can move us. It's a medium unlike any other medium, really. And if you discover a love for it, you pretty much lock that love for comics in lifelong. I think most fans would consider themselves lifelong comic book lovers.
I agree 100% on the lifelong portion of it. When I was a kid, I started reading comics around the age of 5 or 6, and I read them very loyally and very feverishly up through about the age of 19 or 20. Joined the Marine Corps, and it's I found it difficult to keep up with comics, particularly the collecting aspect, while I was in the Marines. And I kind of gave it up for a while. And when I came back from the Marine Corps, I ended up going to a comic convention, and it was the first one I'd gone to ever. And this would have been probably 2010. And I'd never been to a comic convention before. And I went in and I looked around, and I was surrounded by, like-minded fans, like-minded people, and all these books that I either had when I was a kid, wanted when I was a kid, or was intrigued in reading now. And I had gotten away from comics for many years up to that point. And I realized walking around that big convention center and seeing all the fans dressed up and seeing all the merchandise and all the art and everything that was available to me, I realized that the comics was such a huge part of my DNA, and it was never going to change.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. For me, I started seriously I always read comics as a young kid. My dad read them to me before. I think I told you once. We as a young kid, after church, I'd pick some out at the drugstore, and my dad would read them to me even before I could read, and that just became a thing. So I had comics all throughout my life, but at some point, like junior high, I started to understand, there's money involved now. There's a resale market, and I think that piqued my interest back up. But it wasn't the only reason, because then I started seriously reading the stories, seriously looking at the art, and I just became, okay, I have to follow this one, I have to follow this one, I have to follow this artist, this writer, and that became the passion, is following the creators and what they were unfolding. in one of my first cons, I went to a couple, but I mean, one that really strikes me now looking back on it in Pittsburgh, I was probably in my early 20s, and it was the Pittsburgh Comic Con in the mid 90s. I met Stan Lee. This is before he even charged for autographs. I met Stan Lee, met Boris Vialo, and his wife.
Oh,
painters.
yeah.
And I mean, so I think this was all the same year. So the same year they had Julie Schwartz, Erwin Hazen, who created Wildcat, Martin Odell, who created the Golden Age Green Lantern, who talked to my mother for a long time. He and his wife, they kept my mother company. It was really nice. They had Gil Kane. They had Kurt Swan. And now looking back on it, I'm just they had Len Wein, Bernie Wrightson. I mean, how was I lucky enough to have that be one of my first comic book conventions?
Seriously.
Shelley Mulder.
Seriously. and you know, it's almost unimaginable now. Stan Lee reached legendary status before he died. I mean, it's probably I would argue decades before he died, but certainly in the MCU age, it really cemented that his appearances in the MCU really cemented his legacy.
Yeah.
But it's hard to imagine that there was a time when you could go see Stan Lee and there was no line. There was no charge for him to sign a couple of books.
I think they limited it to two free per person, and that line moved pretty quickly that day. It was a different era for sure.
So yeah, definitely.
I still remember like meeting him for the first time, waiting for his signature, and he's like, "Are you ready for it?"
I remember when I met Stan Lee. This was several years ago at Dragon Con, and it was a cattle call because you go in and you're getting a photo with him, and for the listener that may not be familiar with this, when you're meeting a celebrity of that caliber, you don't really get a chance to strike up a conversation with them. You just you come in, you face the camera with the celebrity, they shoot the photo, and you're out of there. The whole process takes 5 or 6 seconds. It really is that quick. But I remember when I went in there, I said thank you. I just said thank you for my childhood.
Wow.
And I mean that's something that I'm sure he's heard a billion times in his life before he passed away. But Marvel, I was a fierce Marvel fan up until I was about 16. That was when I started reading Batman for the first time. But the characters that he either created or co-created were such a huge part of my life up to that point. Fantastic Four and
Sure.
Spider-Man in particular were
Mm-hmm.
the biggest parts of my the books that I read.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, like you said,
it's hard to put into words what meeting someone that had such a huge impact to you feels like. I know exactly what you mean.
No, it is. It absolutely. Especially, this is someone that has impacted countless lives with his creations. And what do you say that he hasn't heard before?
Yeah. I mean, I felt the same way, 20 years ago when in the 90s, Babylon 5 was my favorite TV show at the time ever. And it moved me. I mean, that show just moved me so much and meant so much to me. And I finally got to meet JSM at the JMS at the Heroes Con. It's like 15 years ago, and I just said, thank you for creating Babylon 5. I said it meant so much to me as a work of fiction. I mean, just being able to say that. I mean, it means something to you, being able to say that to someone,
Oh, man, listen. I was, up until probably 2001, a rabid pro wrestling fan. And I got to meet Rowdy Roddy Piper about 4 or 5 years before he passed. And I got to have a brief conversation with him. And when I went up to him, I basically said the same thing. I said, "Thank you for everything that you've given the fans." And I shook his hand, and he brought me in and he hugged me. And he
Wow.
said, "Man, it was my honor."
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, he really gave me a great moment. When I learned he passed, I was actually at a concert. I was waiting for the band to go on, and I read it on my phone, and I was just devastated. But yeah, I guess the moral of the story is, maybe it doesn't have to be something original. Just say something from the heart.
Exactly. And that's all what Thanksgiving's all about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a funny story that just popped into mind from the con I told you about in Pittsburgh when I met Gil Kane. Also, Jim Shooter was there that year. And Jim Shooter had a tendency to, other creators didn't like working with him so much. So I had Jim sign some comics for me. One of them was a Ghost Rider issue that was drawn by Gil Kane. Gil Kane, nicest man, got to meet him. He signed my giant size X-Men I've showed you. He signed that for me, so that was one of his favorite covers. He got to the Ghost Rider. He's like, "Whose signature is this?" I was like, "Jim Shooter." He's like, "Why did he sign it? What did he do?" "He wrote it." Oh.
Side note, Gil Kane is one of my favorite Spider-Man artists. I think he's grossly underappreciated as a Spider-Man artist.
I'd gotten him to sign an issue he did with, it was one where he and Romita, it was an annual where both of them drew Spidey. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, and I had him sign Spider-Man 100. I got him to sign Spider-Man 100, and I also got it signed by Stan that year.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they both signed it in gold, I think.
Was Stan still on the title at that point?
Yeah, I think 100 was his last one, because 101 is the
Okay.
introduction of Morbius, and that's when Roy came in.
Oh, that's right.
I have that
I
one,
think
too.
You're right. Okay. That's right.
Yeah.
In our last few episodes, Tony and I have been doing a segment called What You're Reading, and what we're discussing is basically the comics that are currently at the top of our stack. So, Tony, what you reading?
Really looking forward to diving into Three Jokers now that it's finished. I want to see how I saw the video that DC Fandom, Jeff Johns and Jason Fabok, how they were going back to the Killing Joke to get inspiration for this three-parter. So, I want to see how close it holds up to the Killing Joke.
That is on my to pick up list also. I saw that it finally came out. I don't know if it's hardcover or paperback, but regardless, I want to pick it up and read that myself.
It was one where DC's been putting out these oversized comics for $6, and it was one where I think we all expected it to be oversized, but it was the standard prestige format, regular size, with the cardboard covers. And I'm wondering if the decision to make it that size is because of the Killing Joke. Because they really wanted the feeling of the Killing Joke. I know Fabok had said, he was looking at how Gibbons had laid out the Killing Joke, Dave Gibbons with his artwork, so he wanted to follow that grid guide of, I'm sorry, not Gibbons, Ballin. Ballin did the Killing Joke, I'm sorry. He wanted to follow Brian Ballin, how he laid out those 9-panel grids. I was thinking Watchmen with Gibbons, which is the same 9-panel grids as they used in Killing Joke.
Yeah. So I'm still plowing my way through the Invincible hardcovers that I bought recently, but I will say this: the people that have said, "Oh, it's the greatest superhero run ever," or "You're going to love it," I'm not ready to declare that I think it's the greatest superhero run ever, but it's a damn good read.
That's awesome.
It's really good, and at some point, I've offered you this before. At some point, if you want to borrow my hardcovers and read through them, maybe we can do an episode completely on Invincible.
Okay.
Just at some point. I mean, that's way down the road, but
sure.
But yeah, I'm still, it's the whole run is like 144 issues, something like that. So I've got some ways to go.
I know at the time there was, when all these guys were starting out in indie comics, people that were big names for some of the main big two recently, that we know of now, back when they were indie, they said that at the time, like, the guy that was one of the best writers they knew was Robert Kirkman. Before he hit it big, they could recognize Kirkman as being a really great writer.
You know, they just rebooted, for lack of a better word, Kirkman's Walking Dead run, and what they're doing is they're colorizing each issue. I have mixed feelings about that. Like,
yeah.
I've read some Walking Dead. I never stayed with it because, you know, horror and zombie comics, that's just not my thing. But I got to be honest, I'm way more interested in reading a colorized run of it than I was the original black and white run.
I haven't read or really looked at much of Walking Dead. I know it's strange because I have so many comics, but it's one I never really gravitated to. But I can understand what you're saying. I mean, something like Bernie Wrightson's work on Frankenstein, and he did a Frankenstein comic later on with Steve Niles at IDW. I mean, I can't imagine seeing it colorized. Some work works better in black and white.
Some works better in black and white, and some of it, when you and I recorded our top 3 Batman stories episode, I mentioned that I own the Long Halloween, have owned the Long Halloween in every format, including the Batman Noir line. And as much as I love that story, I don't know if I love it in the noir format, and I thought I would. It's noir, for the listeners that may not know, the noir format is just pencils and ink. There's no color in the presentation whatsoever, which on the surface sounds kind of cool, but in some, like, I've read The Killing Joke noir, and there's one scene in particular where color actually plays a role in the scene. And it's hard to discern that in black and white. Yeah.
I can see that. I think we're all accustomed to color. I know back when I was seriously getting to comics in the late 80s, a lot of indie publishers were using black and white. And it was kind of odd to look at an indie comic with color back in the day. And I think that's why one of my favorite indie books back then, Grendel, you can see when he moved Grendel to Dark Horse, he had a Grendel black, white, and red that was very striking. And that's a series that works in black and white, for sure. You see Batman, I think black and white starting up again soon, next month maybe. And, there's been 3 collected volumes of black and white Batman stories. And all those are excellent stories.
I actually have the Batman.
Oh, you have the Batman?
Go ahead.
I was going to say they're starting a Wolverine.
Oh, are they really?
Yeah, they just started Wolverine Black, White, and Red. I think issue 1's out. Yeah.
I did see that. I wonder if that was inspired from. No, let me rephrase that. I saw where they're doing that, but then I saw where they're doing Harley Quinn, red, black, white, and red, or something like that. It's something that DC basically ripped off from the Wolverine idea. It's the same exact concept.
The original idea was Grendel. Grendel did it first. Dark Horse. Okay.
And side note, you were talking about Batman: The Three Jokers. Paper Girls Volume 3 just came out in hardcover a couple of weeks ago, and I bought the first 2, and I've been waiting for the 3rd volume to come out so I could read the whole run at once. But I've heard really good things about Paper Girls, and I'm pretty sure that's Brian K. Vaughan.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of his work anyway, and I have read that it is, for all intents and purposes, it's Stranger Things That
Oh,
it
cool.
takes place in the 80s, and it's, things from another world. These girls that are paper delivery girls, I guess, that experience these otherworldly things.
Mhm.
So it sounded like it was an interesting thing, and I kind of want to pick it up.
It sounds really cool. I mean, it's weird to me to think. I mean, I grew up in the '80s, so I love stuff from the '80s.
Yeah, me too.
I have a real deep love for '80s because I grew up in it. But I look back and it's like, well, what do people younger than us? They enjoy all these '80s stuff too, and it's like they never experienced it. And I'm wondering where how they look at it and where the love affair came from like, how did people younger than us look at Stranger Things and work like that? Or become fans of Journey and music from the '80s,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my initial response to that is because the music is fantastic. But
true.
But
true,
I'm like
true.
you.
80s
I grew up in the 80s also.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many things from the 80s that I have found during the pandemic. I've never considered myself a particularly nostalgic guy, but I've found myself leaning more towards 80s media than I have probably ever in my life. I listen to more 80s music. I don't know if it's become a source of comfort for me, but yeah, I'm more into 80s things this year than probably I ever have been.
80s was a feel good year. I mean, everything about the 80s was fun, feel good. It seemed that way. I mean, maybe looking back, maybe living it again, it wasn't all that, but I mean, you had like Top Gun, you had Weird Science, I mean, you had, it was techno pop music. I mean, it was fun.
No, it was fun, and it was again, I'm painting with a broad brush, but 80s music was all about, hey, let's party and have a good time. And then somehow when we hit the 90s, music became about, hey, let's all feel like shit about ourselves.
Yeah, very true. I mean, one of my favorite bands, Poison, nothing but a good time right there.
Yeah. And I like a lot of 90s music. I loved Alice in Chains. Absolutely loved Alice in Chains. But I mean, there's no denying the mood shift between 80s music and 90s music. I mean, I mentioned in a previous episode when you and I talked about the passing of Eddie Van Halen, I'd mentioned this group called, or not a group, I think there are a couple of DJs called Hood Internet, and they remix a lot of 80s tunes and they make them into these danceable remix songs, and they're really great. So all the 80s ones are fantastic. But then when you get up to the 90s, I'm not saying they're not good, but they're certainly not as danceable.
Right.
And I know we're getting off on a tangent here.
And when you look at comics, I mean, there were certainly fun comics of the 80s, but it was also a time where, I mean, we were really into revenge fiction. We were into the Dirty Harry era. Dirty Harry was massively big at the time. And I think when you see how that affected comics, you see The Watchmen, you see Dark Knight Returns, and it was so different from stuff we'd seen before in comics.
Sure.
We gravitated to it. The whole revenge era of the 80s played into the fiction. But it didn't dominate it, but it was a part of it.
It's funny that you say that because I just yesterday purchased Rambo First Blood Part 2 in 4K on Amazon. They're having a Black Friday sale, and it was like $5 for 4K. And I'm done. And again, I know we're getting off on a tangent here, but that movie was a juggernaut in 1985. That was a monster hit for Stallone. and
for,
it has
for those,
some revenge elements.
For those who don't know, the writer of First Blood actually wrote some Wolverine for Marvel Comics.
David Morrell?
Yeah, he did some Wolverine
Really?
stories.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
I had no idea.
I think they're a miniseries. Yeah.
Interesting.
It was 5, 6 years ago, maybe.
Oh, wow, that recent.
Yeah. Not too long ago.
I may have to look that up. All right, well, this has been a fun episode, and I want to thank StarPodLog for having Tony and I back again.
Yes, thanks for having us back.
We've got a couple of ideas that we're batting back and forth and are hoping to record at least one, maybe two before the end of the year if they'll have us back. So make sure you look up StarPodLog all over social media. If you're listening to us right now, you're probably on YouTube. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, drop us some comments, share our episode around if you like us. Find StarPodLog on Facebook and elsewhere on social media. There's a fun StarPodLog Facebook group that you can join and participate in, and I certainly encourage all the listeners to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very thankful for StarPodLog as well.
So until next time, my name is Jeff Wiley.
And I'm Tony Barletta.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you again.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.